So here we go.
Some stuff just a little bit ago.
Okay. All right, and so just so I can set this up in case anybody else tunes in. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I am in conversation with Dr. Donald Tyler, and so listen in. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and to follow up, and we'll just go from there. So all of this stuff I edit out after the fact, and then just put up the key components. So yeah, so hey, welcome. I am so excited to get into a conversation with you about a number of things. First, before we go any place though, can you give us a little background on what you do, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, for certain. Well, I'll go all the way back. As you know, I'm born and raised in Akron, Ohio. Um, Lived through some trials and tribulations, so like so many of our folks. But what I landed on was I wanted to get as much knowledge as I can get, build my skills as much as I can, so I can be of most benefit to our young people, our families, and our communities. And I chose to do that via the field of clinical psychology. So I have a PhD actually in clinical child psychology. And so I have been working in this field really even before I went back to school. I started out doing drug and alcohol counseling, also did a lot of drug and alcohol and delinquency prevention work with youth, living in public housing, worked in terms of helping young people who are at risk for failure in terms of education and promoting their positive development, via education and other activities. I did that for many years in Akron, Cleveland, Columbus. Um, Once I decided to go back to school, spent some time in Nashville, Tennessee, where I got my master's from Fisk, came to Chicago in 2004 to get my doctoral degree at DePaul University. Been working in the most disadvantaged communities here in the city of Chicago since that time. And really my work has been consistent in terms of working, with our folks and communities that really are struggling the most, and in much need of, valuable service in many ways. And so really over the course of that time, again, just doing as much as I could to kind of promote the positive development, of our young people in the context of their families and communities. And since 2016 though, or I guess really before that, let me say probably since about 2009, probably I started increasingly focusing my work on gang involved youth and young adults. So actually more young adults than youth, early emerging adults, 18, 19, 20, early 20s, right? And of course, into the teenage years on the other end as well. And so since about 2009, that's been almost my exclusive focus is been working with individuals involved with gangs, mobs, cliques, in communities in Chicago, also for a year in Cleveland for that matter. Um, but mostly here in Chicago on the south and west side. And that has progressed to the point in 2016, I accepted an invitation to work for an organization called Chicago CRED. CRED is an acronym that stands for Create Real Economic Destiny, an organization created by former Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan. When he came back from DC, what was foremost on his mind was doing something about the ongoing violence in the city of Chicago. So we created this organization. We started with 30 young men on the far south side of Chicago. Um, I give Arnie and the rest of the team at the time credit for recognizing the need for behavioral health services. in this population. And so young men and women as well as young people, adolescents who have been involved in violence typically experience just incredible amounts of trauma, almost indescribable amounts of trauma over the course of their lifetime, beginning before they get into the streets. But certainly once they get into the streets, but just witnessing killings, being shot themselves, seeing people murdered, having people close to them killed, just takes a tremendous toll. And so because of that primarily, and also because a great deal of substance use goes hand in hand with all of this trauma, they needed a clinician to provide services to the young men. And so I became the first clinician on the team. We've grown from serving 30 young men with a staff of maybe 5 or 6 up to serving 500 a year across the South and West Side with a staff of more than 100 people.
Wow.
So we've grown dramatically since 2016. And we're really seeing some significant, making a difference in terms of the lives of individuals. And so we've had, more than 1,000 that have gone all the way through our program, and we've served more than that totally. We've been getting evaluated over the past 5 years from a team of researchers from Northwestern. And so the latest results are that for those individuals who complete our entire program, they are 73% likely to be arrested for a violent crime in comparison to people their age in similar circumstances.
You saying less likely or?
Less likely, 73% less likely to be convicted of a violent crime.
Okay.
They also are marginally less likely to be shot as well. And so as we get more individuals in the program and a larger sample size, we may see a significant difference in victimization as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we also seeing reductions in the numbers of shootings taking place in the communities that we work in. We work in 3 communities on the South Side and 1 on the West Side. And, last year, 3 of our communities had 40% reductions in shootings. We still are experiencing reductions this year in those communities as well as the city overall. However, the reductions this year are a little more modest. Still heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, those are some amazing numbers right there.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And to have somebody outside agency tracking that information is also extremely good. Now, so that brings up so many questions for me. How do you encounter these people that may be at risk? Is it that you
Yeah,
guys
for sure.
go out and do outreach
Absolutely.
or? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the whole point of our work as it is, and so our focus is community violence intervention. And so in this work, the best way to go about it is to identify those individuals who are at highest risk for shooting and being shot. Typically the same individuals, right? Those who are most likely to shoot are also the most likely to get shot, right? In our community. So typically gang mob, clique involved folks who've been involved in violence for some period of time. So the work begins with street outreach. So we have men and women who are street outreach workers and violence interrupters. So men and women who were gang involved in their youth and have turned their lives around and are devoted to being ambassadors for peace in our communities. And so they integrate themselves in these communities, and then most of them are from the communities, have connections in the communities. They have what we call license to operate, right, which is the community permission from the community and the individuals to be there and work with them and provide assistance. And so they develop relationships with all of the factions in the communities, particularly the ones who are at war with each other. And they respond to shootings, they mediate conflicts, they work with the warring factions to develop what we call non-aggression or no slide agreements. um, as well as advancing toward what we call peace agreements, which is really the major vehicle by which, we can reduce violence in our communities. The folks who are involved, the groups and individuals who are involved really have to agree, to stop trying to kill each other, literally.
Mhm. And so when they find people who are at risk, I understand that there's one part that happens on the street. In a clinical setting, what does that look like for you? Does that mean group um, counseling, one-on-one
Mhm.
counseling? What does that look like?
Yeah, good questions. And so once our street outreach workers identify persons who are good candidates for the program, and they usually the next step is they meet with one of my staff therapists who provides a clinical assessment. That assessment is trauma focused on, trying to get an understanding of their history of exposure to traumatic events, how that's impacted them in essence, in terms of their social, emotional, and psychological functioning, as well as their substance use. And so our primary vehicle for assisting them is through one-on-one intervention. But we also do some groups as well. Our groups are more preventive, more about providing education as well as some training in key skills. And so we begin typically with a group where we provide education around trauma and its impact, as well as some initial skills around stress management, and safety. Everything really begins with safety, with every person, but certainly with this population, is first and foremost. So that's our focus initially. We do some drug education and harm reduction groups, to begin to make a difference in all of these, pills that young folks are popping. Is, certainly the weed smoking is chronic, but the pills and the other substances are particularly harmful. And so trying to make some headway in that area as well.
Mhm. So trauma is so pervasive, but at the same time, when you think about it, I have been for the last couple of years, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but this idea about epigenetics has been something that has resonated with me,
Mhm.
because what I realized was is that I had fears that I had no way of explaining. And so a lot of times I know that people suffer from trauma, one, that they can't explain. Two, it may have happened so early in their own life that they have no way of knowing or the reasons why. And I
Mhm.
think that particularly in our community, we know from research that babies that are not held or paid attention to for whatever reason still have abandonment connection issues. How do you think that those things play into this idea of trauma, something that can't necessarily be verbalized because it's not a direct experience that they can recall?
Yeah, I mean, those things certainly can have a tremendous impact. And, a lot of the individuals that we work with that have the most difficulty have typically had very difficult early life experiences. But the way honestly, I look at, our whole experience as people in America has been all about exposure to just crazy amounts of trauma and
Mhm,
how we've been resilient, quite frankly, right?
mhm,
And so it's just an ongoing thing throughout our history, and what we see is the ongoing impact of that, right? And so particularly on families, when we're talking about a city like Chicago, you're talking about segregation and discrimination just for decades, right? You've seen the marginalization of families and folks and people in these communities, right? And so the families and the adults are suffering, and so the ability for us to collectively provide for the safety and well-being of our young people, right, has been compromised dramatically just by the chronic stress and ongoing exposure to traumatic events and their impact on individuals and their function, right? And so when I think about that, again, the individuals that we work with today, typically their early life experiences have been very difficult, So what stands out for me the most in working with this population has been a number of young people that I've met who were put out of the house when they were like 10, 11, 12, right? And it didn't go back home, right? And so you're talking about the next 10 plus years being on the street, living in a trap house, going from place to place, couch surfing, what have you, right? And being in the street, right? And so, and this has been when this is a person's experience, right? And so your ability to understand, process, cope, um, and take best care of yourself can sometimes be compromised in a very difficult environment, that remains.
Yeah, but so being put out of the house I couldn't even imagine, right? But at the same time, what happens? How do we, is there an educational piece that goes on with parents and parenting? I mean, you used to work in the school system, so I'm sure that i- is it a parent that has received that kind of trauma that then
Yes,
passes it
we're
on,
talking
or?
about multi-generational trauma,
Mhm,
right? And continuous exposure to traumatic events, not post trauma, but continuous trauma today and likely tomorrow, in addition to just chronic stressors at the same time,
mhm,
right? And, affecting in terms of low income, in terms of unstable places to live, and in terms of health related issues, right? So you just have this host of problems that inundating individuals and families and really overwhelming them to a
mm,
point where their ability to take good care of their young people is not necessarily there. So it's something I've dealt with for some time in the work that I've done, and so a lot of it is about trying to find better ways to respond to these situations and to be able to get resources and assistance, so that those uh, types of decisions are made, right? But a lot of times the child is already involved in the streets, and so then it's like, okay, get out of my house, right? Sometimes it's that type of situation,
mhm,
and so, but it's various reasons for it. But again, I'm attributing all of it to the ongoing multi-generational trauma and chronic stress that we continue to experience that can be debilitating.
mhm. So is there, I love the analogy of, if we keep seeing all of these people that are falling prey to these kinds of conditions, is there a way of going upstream and intervening before this stuff even happens? Is that
Yeah, absolutely.
is that a
Absolutely.
focus?
Right. Yeah, yeah, for certain, right. And so, but it's still a matter of we're dealing with the issue of scale, right? And so many people in these conditions and really not enough resources, not enough organizations, not enough individuals trying to really get involved and provide the necessary services needed, right? And so, but certainly on a smaller scale, we can identify those families as well as those children who may be most at risk and make sure they get the services that they need early on, right? So it's just not enough of that happening, given the vast numbers of families and young people and adults in these communities that, need some intervention, need some support, need some assistance in order to change course.
So now once a person gets into the program and you get them to and I don't know if stabilizing what the goal is, but then what happens after that?
Yep, yep. And so it's really an ongoing it's an ongoing struggle here in terms of increasing their safety. And so our objective is to really help them remove themselves from being involved in terms of violence, right? In terms of shooting someone, right? And so the risk of being shot, though, may still be there for some time. And so how do we establish safety and maintain it for a period of time that will allow this young person to really make a some different choices and invest in building a different life for him or herself, right? And so most of our participants we serve are men, young men, but we also have a women's program too, as well as a youth program also. So there are women who are just as much likely to shoot somebody and be shot as some of the men. And we're seeing increasing violence directed toward the women who also have to deal with domestic violence as well as the street violence, right? And so significant issues and need for support there. And so again, initially establishing some safety, and then providing them with the necessary support to begin to envision a different life for themselves and begin to work toward it. And that, ultimately that means, getting job, finishing high school, getting job training and employment, right? And deciding, and within that midst, deciding where you're going to live and in a way that you can maintain your personal safety.
Mhm.
And so that's kind of what we're working toward.
So I wanna, for, I don't know, some reason, I wanna, like, there's this, like, whoo, like, it seems as though you went from, you were in Akron, almost like people would describe jumping from a frying pan into a skillet or something like that. It just like you are in the epicenter
Yeah.
of where all of this is going. How is this wearing on you?
Not, I don't know. I'm built for this, I think, honestly. I think I'm built for it, Sandra. Yeah, it doesn't bother me too much, to be honest with you, because the reward is worth so much more than the risk involved for me personally. And in some sense, there are common threads though, Sandra. When I started working in the projects in Akron,
Uh-huh.
it was really just small scale of what I ended up getting to by the time I got to Chicago. And when I first got here, I was working in Cabrini Green, right? So one of the largest public housing developments in the world, right?
Right.
And so at that time, I think they had torn down maybe one or two buildings. It's still 20 buildings full of people, right? And so I worked there for 5 years directly in Cabrini Green, going from the little projects on the west and east side of Akron to this massive public house development,
Uh-huh.
in Chicago. But the dynamics are the same though. It's just the scale.
Uh-huh.
The scale is just a much larger, right? And so, but I don't know, this is just kind of where I saw, I don't know that I didn't think it through in this manner. I was just responding to what I felt was needed. You know what I mean? And so which kind of taking me on this journey.
Mm. So, just last year, I was walking my dogs in my neighborhood and happened to walk up on a kid that had just gotten shot, still laying on the ground. Um, there were high school students around, and some seemed upset, others seemed like, did you see? There was all kinds of reactions, but I found myself being um overwhelmed, and I really at the time couldn't even, I couldn't figure out a way of even reaching out to these kids, and it probably was not my place to do so. Um, when I finally got myself back in the house, I started hearing the helicopters and the sirens and all of that
Mhm.
stuff of people starting to come into the scene. And my stress level was so high. I was just, I mean, I was a basket case. And had it not been for me thinking like, oh, it's Tuesday, I can go to yoga. Um, and I found that I could process my trauma through something.
For sure.
How do you process?
Yeah, and certainly some physical activity is really good, right? And so I actually every year I have an annual retreat for my staff, and it's coming up this week. And so we got somebody on hand to do yoga. We got somebody doing Reiki, some and some other things, and some some healing type of groups that we're going to do, etc. So it's important, right? And so, but for me personally, when I say I think I'm built for it, it's just because I have a different worldview, a different perspective on life and death that I've had honestly since my mother died when I was 24 years old, right? And so that just changed my entire worldview had to shift and get some better understanding of you know, God and humanity and our individual lives intertwined, with the universe and what it all means. And just understanding that life is short. You can't predict how long you're going to be here. And so just focusing on more, how do we get as much out of the time that we are here, but also embracing our mortality and recognizing that it's very real, right? It's as real as you get, is that we're only going to be on this earth in this form for a period of time, and it's going to be over with, right? And so what are you doing with that time is more how I look at it. And I'm expecting that folks are going to die, period. It's just life, and so I
Mhm.
invest myself in the work trying to give these young people a better opportunity to live, right? Knowing that it is not promised, and also knowing that these individuals are the most likely people to get shot. I mean, their odds of getting shot are dramatically higher than just the average person in the city, right?
Mm,
And so we've lost more than 40 young people since 2016. About half of those individuals I knew, about a third, or I really knew, like I worked with them, knew them personally, right? And so, of course, it hurts, it's painful. I hate to see that loss of life, right? And so, I allow myself to feel the emotions when they come. I'm not holding none of it back. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna cry out. I'm gonna let the tears flow. I'm gonna feel the pain. But I'm gonna walk around, and then I'm gonna think about, okay, what I need to do next.
mm,
Right? And I'm gonna channel it into continue to do this work. And I carry those young people memories. Some of them I've got their pictures around my office, and they really give me more energy, honestly, to keep going and to do more because their lives were valuable,
mm.
right? These were valuable young people. Some of them were doing things, and look, they weren't angels. Some of them were killers, literally, right?
Right.
But they were young people. What the saying is, good kids, mad city. The circumstances put them in this position, right? They're no worse or better than any other human being, although they've done terrible acts, right? But it's because of the terrible situation that they find themselves in,
Hmm.
right, where they commit these acts. And so we got to change the circumstances. And so
So do you
I'm okay
perceive
with it.
them, do you perceive them as being, um, I want to say connected emotionally? I mean, it seems to me that there's got to be some kind of disconnect that would enable you to, just to kill another, or is that just the kill or be killed kind of
Yes,
survival?
it's literally, Sandra, a kill or be killed circumstances.
Mm,
Right? I got to kill this person so they don't kill me. I mean, it's just on that level for most of them, right? And so certainly we have, yeah, there's no violence taking place that is this not virtually none, from my point of view. This taking place, this not a response to somebody else being harmed or killed. Most of it is just endless cycles of retaliation, right? And also the expectation, and it's warfare. People don't understand that part either.
mm,
It's literally warfare. It's no different than what's going on between Russia and Ukraine or Israel and Hamas. right? Except it's not sanctioned by a government, but
Right.
it's warfare between groups of people, right,
Uh,
who've been killing each other for a period of time. And for some, and now it's a matter of, okay, I'm gonna kill them or they're gonna kill me, type of thing. And so we have to, that's where we have to do our work to establish peace.
so this is not fighting over resources or territory, or is it?
Well, that you raise a good point, right? And so a lot of it's interpersonal these days, right? Sometimes, things can arise around the drug trade, right? You can have conflict arise from that standpoint around drug markets, right? But so much of it is just interpersonal. But it's been happening for so long, and there's been so many people socialized in this context, and I talk about this all the time, particularly with young men. They're conditioned to react, with aggression, right? And so a lot of this is the trauma impact, right? But they're conditioned to react with extreme force, sometimes regardless of how big the problem is, or
Mhm.
what the conflict may be about, right? And particularly when you're talking about with other young men, the condition is such that if there's some type of conflict, I'm expecting this person's going to pull his weapon, so I better get mine and start firing without question, right? Because the expectation is the other person is going to do the same, right? And whether that's actually the case or not. And so a lot of this is just rooted in trauma. What I see that people also don't understand. And so post-traumatic stress in soldiers, right? Combat related trauma, the symptoms that our young people experience look very much like combat trauma in terms of intense anger and aggression,
Mhm.
right? Rooted in the other, symptoms of traumatic stress. And so this is the source, the cause, but it's kind of self-perpetuating because the more shootings and more violence occur. I just showed one of my colleagues a study that demonstrated that someone getting shot within a 5 mile radius of where some children live at has they demonstrated an impact on their later functioning, social, emotionally,
Mhm.
just living in proximity to someone having been shot, right? And so there's significant dynamics here at work, and it's a lot left for us to do.
Well, you
To
know what? The
realize
same
that.
thing is inversely true, that living proximate to people who meditate
Hmm.
lowers that level, or can have a dampening effect on a community. So are you
Great
still
point.
part of a meditation group?
Not at present. Mine is just pretty much solo at this point.
Uh-huh.
Still connecting here and there when I get opportunity with different groups.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, great point, and that's part of the change that's needed in our communities for sure.
So if you were to, I know that you do the clinical piece, but if you were to design a program for young people, where would you start? If you were to try, if the goal was to decrease the level of violence in a community, would you start with kids in elementary school, or would you start with parents, or where would you start?
Yeah, I would start with the adults in the community, right, and families, right. So if I was just designing my own project here, I would start in a given community with those adults, trying to bring them together and put in place what we need to best provide, protect, and raise young people in the community. What do we need to do that, right? So we need to bring adults together, across sectors and have a plan about how we're going to do that for the youth in this community, right? We're going to have to identify what the families need in terms of providing what they need to be safe, and had their needs met, psychologically, socially, emotionally, physically, etc. So bringing adults together, establishing what the families need and what the children and young people need in the community.
So that's
And
like
with those,
providing wraparound services for the adults so that they are less stressed when they deal with their children.
absolutely right. And
Uh-huh.
so it all begins with the care that they get from adults, right? The modeling that they get from adults, the structure they get from other adults. I mean, one of the reasons that there's such a problem among, adolescents, the primary issue is so many youth spending time in the community outside the watchful eye of responsible adults, right? Is where so much stuff takes place, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
that's been the case,
Mhm.
since long before we were adolescents, right? And so I can certainly think about myself running where my parents do all the things. I was running around and doing with my friends with nobody watching over us,
Mhm.
So it kind of begins on that level. That's a key piece of it. How are you spending their time with and with who doing what beyond the watchful eye of responsible adults, right? So how do we close those gaps to some extent? And that's been the case for a long time in terms of adolescence,
Right.
America, right? So
Right. So, but now there are certain things like me running across that child laying on out there on the
mhm,
concrete. Um, that it was traumatic for me. So I know it's traumatic for the students who witnessed it. And the
for sure.
numbers of them that were standing right there in the same bus stop and said, I didn't see anything, I just saw him fall. Right.
Mhm,
So there is trauma and insecurity. There's a lot of fear around that. But then you get this thing where they'll bring in counselors for a day at a school. And then it's as if all is well because, we made counselors available and then they wash their hands of it.
mhm,
Is that enough or is there something
mhm.
that some way we could better deal with the trauma that our children see
Yeah, yeah.
that we cannot prevent?
Yeah, it definitely needs to be more. I will say this though, each individual child or person is a little different. And so so we're not all affected the same way by the same circumstance, right? And so, but there definitely needs to be more than that. I think the initial crisis response is an important one in terms of counselors coming to the school
Mm,
immediately and being there for a time. But then there needs to be follow-up around each of those people exposed to have some understanding of how they're coping, whether what symptoms are they having, whether those symptoms continue or not, right? And
mm,
so for most individuals, they may experience what is called acute traumatic stress, right? And so the symptoms are similar to post-traumatic stress, except it's over a shorter period of time, and then those symptoms remit, maybe after a few weeks or so,
mhm,
right? Versus someone, but then others may have a lasting impact from that event that goes beyond weeks and even months potentially. And so you have to have something in place to identify those individuals and make sure they get the support that they need. And plus, it's a matter of everybody is, it's impacted everyone's consciousness exposed to it. And so now what does this mean to you, right? And so a person may not have lasting, emotional or psychological or physical symptoms, but the meaning that they make beyond after witnessing such an event, right? That may change their outlook on the world for the rest of their life,
yeah.
right? And so now what are we doing about that, right? And so how are we responding to make sure people can react and respond to the situation in a way where we can continue to invest in what we need to be healthy and have stronger communities
Mm,
versus maybe having a more maladaptive response or reaction.
mhm. So there are plenty of people who may be watching or may hear this that want to know what they can do. What would your advice be to someone who It could be it could just be a community member or a neighbor or something. What can people do?
Yeah. You know, in cities like Chicago and Cleveland and increasingly Akron, in other cities around the country and the world, you know, when you have street violence, right, particularly when it is a growing and an ongoing thing, right, when you have street organizations or gangs or what have you that, you know, are waging war against each other, when you have individuals conditioned to respond in a violent way when there's conflict, the real solution is that we have to get involved, right? We have to get involved in their lives, right? Though these folks are not just going to, you know, some of them are going to change on their own. Don't let me not, you know, make a statement that is too strong, right? You're going to have individuals who are going to change the direction of their own lives in the midst of this, right? But if we want the level of change that will bring the type of peace that we need in our communities, then we're going to have to get involved in the lives of these young people, right?
Mhm,
We're going to have to get to know them. We're going to have to understand them, right? So that they trust us, so they allow us to help them, right? And then we have to be strategic about the type of help we provide, right? If you have groups at war, then we're going to have to figure out how we mediate this conflict and get them agree to stop,
mhm,
right? If we don't, then it's going to be ongoing back and forth retaliatory killings, right? And so
mhm.
those are the things that I would say in the short term. Getting involved and understand the strategies that are needed in order to help individuals change who are involved in this.
Now, a lot of times what we hear people saying is that I called the police. I called the police, and the only way that they get involved is sometimes phoning the police. Um, w- is there some best practices or something else, some other way that I mean, because the police in themselves add a danger, element of danger
For sure.
anytime they show up in a
Mhm.
situation. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Are you saying about calling the police or about?
Um, is there alternatives? Are there alternatives? Is because one of the
Yeah.
things that I found is that kids sometimes feel ostracized by adults, seniors. They feel as if they're not believed, not supported. So there is an alienation sometimes that is felt.
Mhm.
And so I just wonder if that is you know, what's another
Yeah.
way that we
Yeah,
can address
that can be very problematic. And certainly, you know, we need the police to have a right relationship with the community, right? And so some folk, that's a way of getting involved, right? And each of us have different strengths, different abilities, different ways of helping, right? We certainly need individuals to work with the police to get them to really make the necessary reforms, right, in order for them to have a relationship with the community where there's trust, and it's not just about, you know, just an invading army coming in, right? And so
uh-huh.
that work has to be done, right? And so because it's not going to go well, right? Otherwise, you know,
Mm,
so they may come in and solve whatever short-term problem is needed. And I certainly, you know, individuals have to make their best judgment about related to their own safety. And sometimes that means calling the police for sure, right? And so, but there's work that has to be done with that to get to a point where we need to be ideally in our communities.
good, good, good. All right. I thank you for this conversation. This has been so informative, and I think that a lot of times, people want to help but just don't know how.
Mhm.
And maybe that is part of the way to kind of give people some kind of clue as to what they also can do
Yeah.
instead of just sitting around pointing the finger.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some organized community violence intervention services taking place in the city of Chicago. I'm city of Cleveland. I don't know any individuals in Cleveland personally. I know there's some work going on in Akron. I've talked with some of the folks involved in efforts in Akron. Got to be going on in Cleveland to some extent. And so that's the other thing about getting involved. Become aware of who are those organizations doing the work currently and how can I assist them, right?
Yeah.
How can you expand these services? What services are working well? Which ones do we need to invest in and expand, right? And so what approach is the city taking
Right.
to the
So,
problem?
so right now there is an influx of programs that are being called for, money pumped out into our community for just this purpose. And so, identifying those that are actually in a particular neighborhood or in our community is part of the work. And just finding out information just such as this is one of the ways in which we kind of
Yeah.
start figuring out how to support the ones that are already doing this work. We've got programs out here for young people. And so I guess it's just figuring out how to be more supportive of what's going on already.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so
Welcome.
much.
Mhm.
This has been wonderful, and hopefully I can tap you again sometime next year so we can have
For
a
sure.
further discussion on this.
Yep. Sounds great.
All right.
Anytime.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
yeah, and have an amazing holiday season or whatever you
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. For sure.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks.
Take care.
You too. And let's see. How do I